Kavna. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, there may be some changes in the air for Jefferson Parish as an election year approaches, in which a contested parish president race could have a trickle-down effect on the council. And also, some Jefferson residents are concerned about cyanide in their air and are raising questions. We'll air out these stories as well as the New Orleans Council versus Entergy. Mitch Landrieu looks ahead and changes in Carnival. Our Future Watch segment explores plans for the former Jazzland site. Joining us are tonight's Informed Sources. ERROL LABORDE, producer of Informed Sources. Stephanie Grace, columnist, The New Orleans Advocate. Don Ostrom, Channel 12's Future Watch reporter. And Mark Schleifstein, environmental reporter, NOLA.com, The Times-Picayune. I'm going to go over to Stephanie first. And it is election year and a race for a JP president, which could trickle down to council seats. So give us what's up there.
Running. Yeah. Cynthia Lee Shang, the councilwoman, at-large councilwoman, former district councilwoman, had formally announced a little while ago, but she had her kickoff this week. And I've been to a number of these that are designed as kind of a show of force. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. This one worked. This one, the place was packed. It was at Southport Hall in a rainy night with a flooded parking lot, and still people made their way there. And you looked around and you're like, this is everybody. This is, you know, these are the political power brokers. These are the business power brokers. There were people who are connected to Mike Yanni, the current parish president, who may or may not run. There were people connected to John Young, the former parish president, who says he's running. And you know, kind of an interesting thing happened in the middle of it is that people started passing their phones around because John Young had sent out an email. He had sent out a press release and a video attacking Cynthia Lee Shang
while she was
announcing. So it's kind of include me in the story, you know, and it basically said, was pointing to the fact that everybody kind of expected that she would get a big crowd, and she did. So he tried to use that against her. He said, you know, she's the choice of the courthouse crowd. He said, I'm working for you. That was his line. It was ostensibly about covering canals, but it was really about.
It's also relevant to the story that she was Harry Lee's daughter. And
exactly.
Harry Lee was a very powerful and beloved political figure for a long time.
Of course. And she started off, she talked about him, she talked about his memory, she talked about the memory of her husband. A lot of people know that her husband died very young. She was a single mother. She's been a single mother for a number of years. Her teenage kids introduced her. It's very emotional. And certainly people connected to Harry Lee were around. Newell Norman was there, Joe LaPinto was there, former parish president Tim Coulon is all in, he was there. A bunch of parish council members were there. Really, you know, a lot of legislators, very recognizable faces.
How long has she been on council?
10 years.
10 years. She was first district and then she went to at-large.
Correct.
Okay. And then John Young, now he's a former
parish president, and it's interesting because he also in this email talked about how he started the Inspector General's office. He was an interesting figure because he was a pretty popular figure, and he came between two parish presidents who had really big scandals. Aaron Broussard, of course, who went to prison, and Mike Yanni, who had the sexting incident. So I think people do look back on his tenure somewhat fondly. The question is, do they want him or do they want Cynthia Lee Shang, who is also very popular?
So Cynthia Lee Shang could have run second term, right, for council, or did she term out?
I believe she could have, yes.
But at any rate, she's running.
At large, she could have, yes.
She's running for president.
Yes.
So that seat's empty. And then the other council at large
is Chris Roberts, and he is termed out.
So we're going to have some changes.
So we have two at-large council races, and those always get interesting in Jefferson Parish. People have to decide which one they're going to run for. So far, we have Paul Johnston, the district councilman who's termed out, Ricky Template, a district councilman who's also termed out. They probably would run in different seats. Keith Conley, who is the former CEO to Mike Yanni, he's also an elected official, formerly in Kenner. And then the wild card here is Jennifer Van Franken, who is currently the district council member in that kind of Old Metairie, Bucktown area. And she could run again she's not term limited, but she is looking at that race. She told me she would decide in a few weeks. And the interesting calculation for her is, I think if she would like to run for at-large at some point, if she waits 4 years, then there will be two incumbents who can run again. So she would have to run it against an incumbent. So if she wants a shot at an open seat, this is the time to run.
Anybody else terming out on council?
Mark Spears is terming out, so that's 4. And Chris Roberts, who could run for a district seat again, where he came from. The people who are not termed out are Dominic Impastato, who was just, he was there, by the way. It was interesting, Dominic Impastato was there, and Danny Martini, the state senator who's very close to the Lee family, and had this very heated race for parish council. They were both there at Cynthia's event. Jennifer Van Vranken and Cynthia Leisha.
It's been said about the, if you compare the structure of government between Orleans Parish and Jefferson Parish, they both have an executive.
Right.
They both have a 7-member council, even though the at-large districts, yeah, there's an at-large and 2 others. But supposedly that the Jefferson Parish Council is perceived as being more powerful
correct.
than Orleans Parish. They have more, like they take the lead on contracts. That sort of thing.
That's the big thing, that they have more, some of these executive functions fall under the legislative branch in Jefferson, where they fall under the executive branch in Orleans. So the parish presidency is considered a less strong job, a less powerful job than the New Orleans mayor's office.
And politically, it's an unusual parish because of the divide with the river. I mean, there's a part of Orleans Parish that's on the river, on the other side of the river too, but it's fairly small.
Right.
But this is a pretty significant divide between the two parts
And
of
they
the
have different
parish.
politics. They have, the East Bank is more populist, it's more Republican. And then you have Kenner, which you have these municipalities, so some of the government functions are handled by the parish, some of them are handled by the city, and then you have Metairie, which is not incorporated, so it's all parish. There's a lot going on there.
Harahan is your municipality.
Harahan and a few others, Gretna, yeah.
But way down,
Kenner's the big one.
way far away. Not even,
Isle,
Grand
yes.
Isle, way far
Has its
away,
own
right.
politics, yes.
Yeah, as I said, way far away, not even connected by land
Right.
to the rest of it. Only connected by water is Grand Isle.
But they like the
Right,
tarp
exactly.
on rodeo, so.
Mike Ennie, do we know yet if he's going to seek
We do not
re-election?
know yet.
Okie doke. All right. Well,
Okay.
we'll see how that plays out in
Yes.
Jefferson. Thanks a lot. Still talking about Jefferson. In Jefferson Parish, a couple of things linked here. A plant there, Cornerstone Plant, which had been a producer, has been for more than half a century of cyanide. They want to expand. East Bank residents are really unhappy about that because of the fact that they've been smelling a lot of odors that they don't like. They don't really know the source fully. So we're seeing some protests. So where is all this going to go?
Right. Well, it's probably going to result in this facility getting its licenses, getting its permits to continue to operate and to have this new facility. It's a $100 million investment. It's making cyanide, and so there are concerns about that because it's a poison.
Well, yeah,
and
you hear the
people
word
are
cyanide,
concerned
you get
about it.
concerned, sure.
So that, but that facility, the campus that it's on, has made cyanide since the very beginning, since the 50s, when American Cyanamid originally owned it, and then it became Cytec, and more recently it's become Cornerstone Chemicals. The reality is that they want to put in this new facility. It has gotten really strong blowback from the community. There's more than 800 written comments have already been filed with DEQ. But the question is, exactly what can DEQ do about what these comments are? If they don't, if they just say, we don't want this poison in our neighborhood, that doesn't work under state law or under federal law, which is how these things are approved. But we'll have to see how that works. The company does have a little bit from the time that it has been Cornerstone Chemical. It has a couple of accidents that have occurred. There was one incident where a worker was overcome by cyanide in a closed building and had to be taken to the hospital. And there was another incident also in 2017 where a chunk of cyanide, a couple of 100 pounds of cyanide were released into the Mississippi River, which of course is our water supplies.
Yeah, right.
So that's another concern. In both instances, the company went through the process of being cited by the state and meeting whatever the state's requirements were for that. But the overriding thing with all of this is that there was a in-place group of people who were going to oppose this facility. And those are the people who have been very upset in River Ridge and Harahan and Wagaman over these odors that continue to be a significant problem in their homes. And they've been trying to figure out where that comes from. DEQ so far has put the tail on the donkey being the Jefferson Parish landfill, which is a facility that has lots of problems that date back several years and improperly operated, and old facilities that have been leaking these gases, sulfur dioxide especially, that can be smelled. But at times, some of these smells are believed to be coming from the Cornerstone facility as well. So you'll see that the DEQ people, when they're going out to check, they're putting their mobile units out in front of the Cornerstone facility, as well as the landfill, to see what's going on.
And you can understand the residents being concerned, because over the past, 2 or 3 years now, this has really been a problem. It's seeping into their homes. Some people saying they're thinking about leaving because it is strong. It's real. I don't know if you've ever had a chance to smell it. I have, and it is real.
I think one of the interesting things about this is that Jefferson Parish actually is in the midst of trying to figure out how to put its own monitors up. It's basically like the residents themselves gotten fed up with DEQ and said, we're going to go find out what the heck this is, and if it means putting a monitoring system in, we'll try to do it. How successful that will be remains to be seen.
Will there be public hearings regarding the expansion of the Cornerstone plant?
I think that this one is the key one. This is there was a public hearing on last Tuesday night for a particular facility, and for their air permit, and I think that's all that they're going to need, pretty much.
All right, and then really quickly also, up, I guess it's north of us, right?
Right, in St. James Parish. You're talking about the Mosaic facility.
Right, exactly, in gypsum wall.
Right. So if you remember, Freeport-McMoRan used to own all of these fertilizer plants. Well, Mosaic is the company that now owns one of those fertilizer plants that's still operating, and they take fertilizer rock that they mine in Florida, and they crush it up, and the waste product is gypsum, like in wallboards, but it's not as clean as the stuff that you get in wallboards. And they stack it in these huge piles. This one is 200 feet high, and the problem is that there's this huge area of water that's at the top of this huge pile of waste.
Acidic water,
and it's very acidic. It's about as acidic as a lemon. Okay, so that's pretty nasty. If that huge amount of water gets out, it could get into the Blind River and also into Maurepas Swamp, and could be a real problem. The company says that it is attempting as quickly as possible to get the problems that they have with that under control.
All right.
So we'll see what happens.
That is a very big environmental concern also. All right, Mark, thanks a lot. Don, over to you. Jazzland, still nothing there.
I wish I could tell you it's coming. Something's coming back. Anything's coming back. I also wish someone had tabulated over the years. Maybe this is a job for a print journalist who needs a story, but how much money has been spent on analysis, appraisals, studies. Right now, the city with the New Orleans Business Alliance has an independent consultant working on a paper on the highest, best use for that land. Jazzland, developed in the late 1990s, was opened as Jazzland in May 2000, became Six Flags 2 years later when Jazzland filed for bankruptcy, closed its doors in August of 2005, said closed for the storm, and as we all know, has never reopened. It has been used on and off as a movie site, a Percy Jackson movie, that's the biggest one that was shot out there, commercials, other things, but it is a dilapidated old amusement park on which a 2016 appraisal found that none of the rides, buildings, anything have any value besides scrap. And that even with the value in the scrap, maybe there are some pieces within it that could be sold off. So within the value of the scrap, it's still going to cost over $1 million to clear the site after you've sold the scrap. So the appraisal put the property at about $3 million for the whole Jazzland property plus a secondary property that's referred to in all the paperwork as parcel number 1. That parcel is 65 acres, and that would be about $260,000. In May of 2017, the city and the Industrial Development Board that actually owns the property got 3 proposals for purchase for the site. All of them were basically new uses as amusement parks. All of them were rejected because the IDB, or the Industrial Development Board, felt like even if they had the money to purchase the property, they really didn't have enough resources behind them to have it not become blighted again. So the bottom line for what's happening right now is they're waiting for the results of this independent consultant to see what the best use is. The IDB and the city have renewed, as of last May, their cooperative endeavor agreement for the property, which means the IDB owns it, but the city is helping, and the maintenance kind of goes back and forth. That agreement expires in May of this year. The city has been promising me some comment on this since Tuesday. I never heard from them, except for we'll get to you, what's your deadline, we'll get to you.
Still didn't hear from them.
And I still didn't hear from them. So the secondary parcel out there would need wetland mitigation if it were to be developed. The former Jazzland site does have a lot of improvements and roadways and parking lots and buildings. A lot of that is in bad shape, but could be rebuilt without too much trouble. So it's just a matter of finding the right use for that property. We all sat around talking before the show and said, somebody has to be able to figure out a way to make it a profitable piece of land.
Even though
especially if you can pick it up for, none of us have $3 million, but big business people, $3 million for a site that big is not crazy
And with
money.
infrastructure laid in there.
Right.
Even though I don't think the answer will ever realistically be something to which the family brings the kids
No,
for an evening.
probably more an industrial use.
Yeah.
The appraisal from 2016 found that the best use would probably be an owner-operator. So the people who own the land also operate the land. It's not a leased space. It's not a mall-type structure. It's a company that headquarters there and builds its widgets or whatever.
A mall was
there.
one of the ideas, right?
A mall was
That
one of
never
the
worked.
ideas.
Yeah.
Sports fields, multifamily, you name it. It's been thrown about, but nothing has stuck
And so
yet.
consultants, when are they going to come through? We don't know.
We don't know when that
Okay.
report will be done. Stay
Alrighty.
tuned.
Thanks a lot, Dawn. Stephanie, over to you. Entergy and council have been kind of going at it.
Also
and
stay tuned.
Yeah, stay tuned on that one.
Well, so this week, I think for this new council, the easy part was showing their opposition, denouncing what Entergy did when it was trying to get this new plant approved. The paid actors, the fake protesters,
The astroturfing.
the
as they call it,
astroturfing.
yeah.
And we've talked about that quite a bit. The hard part is, what do you do about this plant that has already been granted permission by the previous council in a 6-1 vote to be built? And for a long time, the council has been talking about taking another vote on that, revisiting that. They're not going to do that. They've pulled back on that. And this week, the committee that oversees Entergy looked at, they did not take a vote actually, but they looked at basically saying that this plant can go forward. Entergy has to pay a $5 million fine. And they didn't vote on it, but they forwarded it to the full council, which will consider it next week. And the issue really is, a couple issues. One is, does Entergy need the plant? Does the city need the plant? What are the environmental issues? The second is, what have they done by granting permission last year? Because Entergy has been working on it, and Entergy has spent $96 million already. And what the council chairman, Helena Moreno, has said is, we really, the taxpayers could be on the hook for that if we end up revoking permission. So,
Right, and before the permission was given, there was like a 1.5-year study gone into it before the previous council approved it. The opponents, though, they say, why are they opposed to it? Why do they say this is, no to this?
a number of reasons. One, and I hope Mark will chime in on some of the environmental issues. One is that the idea that it's kind of old power as opposed to new power, that Entergy hasn't done enough to invest in renewables and things like that.
One of the other issues is that the way the plant is going to operate, at least this is my understanding, is that it's going to be using groundwater, pulling water out of the ground as a coolant. And the concern there is that pulling water out of the ground will increase subsidence in that area where there's already a high amount of subsidence because of other industries that are already out there, like Folgers and the Michoud facility. So,
Okay. Well, it goes to now to, once again, to the whole council. And at their next meeting?
Yes,
Okay.
next week.
Okie dokie. Thanks
And
a lot.
probably another big show of force of opponents.
Right.
And not paid actors
And
this
not
time.
paid actors. Right, exactly. All right,
Yes.
Errol, over to you. Some changes in Carnival this year.
Yeah. You know, Carnival's always about tradition, yet there's always this movement, there's always change. And looking at this Carnival, I see things happening that are just seeing a new direction in Carnival. Not necessarily a bad direction, but just things happening. There's a lot of energy out there. One of the surprising things was the announcement from the Rex organization that float builder Blaine Kern would no longer build their parades. They're building this year's parade, but not next year. They didn't give an official reason why, but the word is it was just a cost thing, that the prices kept on going up. Rex had a luncheon, and they had Barry Kern, who's Blaine Kern's son, one of his sons, who runs the company, and they all tried to look like it was all everybody's friends, and they gave him a plaque, and that there was goodwill. But it is a change in Carnival because in the 1950s, there was a captain of the Rex organization named Darwin Finner, and he's looked back as one of the great captains of Rex, who really did a lot to rebuild the organization. And he hired, it was a really surprise, this 28-year-old guy from the West Bank who had been working on the parade called Hour, and this was Blaine Kern, to do the Rex parade. And not only that, on his own money, sent him to Italy, to Via Reggio, to study float building techniques. And they were doing a lot of the classic floats with the moving parts and with the moving heads. And so a lot of what Blaine Kern learned, he learned because the Rex organization sent him to Via Reggio and became an invitation. And over time, he made several trips. Well, Blaine Kern became a big, big organization. Now they do things worldwide. And at the time, when they got the contract, they were pretty much doing Rex. Now they do, the Super Cruise didn't exist, but now they do Endymion and Orpheus and Bacchus. And another one of the big surprises is that Rex this year picked up the crew of Iris. And in doing this, I think they're doing more floats and bigger floats. And this leads to another thing, is that how large the female scene in Carnival is becoming. It started with music. I mean, there always were women who were riding in Carnival, but mostly in Orleans Parish and weekend daytime parades. But when Muses started, that Muses was the first major nighttime parade. That was an all-women's parade, especially in an era when women were such a part of the professional workforce. And quickly, it got a lot of members, and then because of that, Nick started. And now Iris has had apparently a membership drive. Iris is claiming to have more riders than Nick's or Muses. Last year, Nick's was claiming to be bigger than Endymion. Endymion sort of sets the standard. Now they're all saying we're bigger than Endymion. And so that's showed a real increase in women just as riding floats. And then also more and more the street groups of people that are walking. So that's been two major developments in Carnival.
All right, and we're getting close to the real middle of Carnival season, too.
And the other major development, just to mention real quick, is the Rex organization's announcement that the band of this Carnival Ball would be the symphony, at least the musicians from the
Louisiana
symphony.
Philharmonic.
And at that same Rex luncheon, they had a little two-piece group that played If Ever I Cease to Love on strings, and it was beautiful.
It will be beautiful, the Philharmonic. But of course, the other orchestra did a great job, too. All righty, all right, ready for Carnival, about
Here we
to
go.
start. Okay, Stephanie, what about Michelangelo? Is he going to or isn't he?
To quote him, probably not.
And that's
Although I
run
never
for
say
president
never.
is what we're talking
Run for
about, right.
president. Of course, this conversation has been going on for quite a while. It's been becoming somewhat apparent in the last few months, really, since the 2018 midterm elections, because the race has been developing so quickly, and you've had so many candidates announcing going to Iowa, going to New Hampshire, putting their hiring people. This is really the time when things are coming together, and then to see Mitch Landrieu kind of sit on the sidelines, you think maybe he's not so serious about this. He has been saying that he probably would support Joe Biden if he gets in. That's still a possibility. But he's also done some interviews that have been kind of interesting. One in particular with the New York Times, where he talked about two things. One, that he is someone who is maybe centrist isn't the right word, but because he's very progressive, but he's probably less, I would say, maybe disruptive than some of the other Democrats, maybe more of an incrementalist. And wondering whether that's not really where the party is right now, with people like Elizabeth Warren running, and Bernie Sanders, of course, is still likely to run. And people talking about Medicaid for all, and big taxing
Medicare for
changes,
all, yeah.
Medicare, excuse me, some really big changes that would happen. Another is that obviously his kind of calling card nationally is the Confederate monuments, this speech he gave, this incredibly well-received speech on race. And he kind of wondered whether how it would be for a white man to kind of have that be his issue when he's running against several African-American candidates, Kamala Harris and Cory Booker, and then there's Julian Castro, who's Latino. So I think it looks like a no at this point, but again, remember 2010, he was a no for mayor, and then he was a yes, and then he was mayor.
And
so
there are still those nationally who are looking at him.
And it's interesting, the conversation about him hasn't really even died down since he said that. There was a major Washington Post column recently by Michael Gerson saying, he's the guy he should be on the stage when we have this conversation about how we move on from Donald Trump.
It would be interesting to see Mitch Landrieu
Debate Donald Trump. Wouldn't that be
Definitely
fun?
would.
Yes.
It's time to
Hair
look ahead.
versus no hair.
Now,
Well, speaking of carnival, here's a scoop from the guys who sell tuxedos. Traditionally, if for men, either you wear white tie and tails or the black tuxedo, the regular tuxedo coat. Well, they're saying some of the balls, especially the ones where you have the dances, like Endymion and Orpheus and Bacchus, that they are allowing, instead of wearing the black coat, they're starting to sell all these multicolor, sparkly type of jackets now, and they're allowing that, and they're actually encouraging it, because just to make more of a colorful sight.
Wow.
So it's getting to be, I mean, men haven't had a
Fun
different,
for men to
men,
dress.
men haven't had a different way to look in 2 centuries, all right, and so there may be a chance here.
You're due.
all righty, all right. Stephanie.
Today, campaign finance reports are due, and it's a good time to point out that on Friday, the State Ethics Board okayed an application for a female legislative candidate to use some of her campaign money to pay child care expenses specifically connected to campaign activities. This is a reversal from something they did a few months ago. There was a lot of public pressure on them to reverse, and they did.
All right, interesting. Don.
Monday evening at 5:30 at the Charity School of Nursing gym, which is at 450 South Claiborne. It's your opportunity to give public comment on how you want Charity Hospital to be redeveloped. So if you're interested in that new neighborhood downtown, 5:30 on Monday.
All right, Mark.
Real quick, the state has been focusing lots on mid-Barataria sediment diversion. Now the shift is over to the other side of the river, the east side of the river. Mid-Breton is about ready to get some major contracts.
Really interesting. All right, guys, thanks a lot for an interesting conversation, and thank you for joining us. We want to see you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.